interesting day today. We've got David Blatherwick, a new panelist for us. I'm anxious to hear what he has to say, but I'm going to leave it to him as he introduces himself.
Thanks, Doug. David Blatherwick. I've been with AKF for some time now. My background is leading the software technology side of a number of software product companies. And I'm really excited to kind of share this with you because I've been kind of involved in this space for probably 15 years. And I'm excited because we're starting to get over the hump of what we need in order to make this work correctly. And we're going to kind of go through this at kind of a light speed, but we'll make it through. And I'm not sure of the format, but please ask questions if you need to, or if you want to, or if you can.
All right, I think we have critical mass. Let's get started.
All right, so let's dial in here. So the question is like, why do we want to do this? And I want to just a real quick story. So I was working with a presence center. We were building a new product to help people interact with companies they're related to in a new and different way, because we know that if, I don't know, there's an example in here where, a bike tire fails and we end up talking to people and we end up waiting on hold and we end up going through this experience of trying to get a bike tire fixed or anything else done where we're going into a contact center. And the level of anxiety that most people have when they make that phone call and knowing they're going to be on hold and dealing with that and are they going to get to the outcome that they want is really challenging. So when we were building this product, we would say things like, we want to create kind of a one-to-one relationship between people and companies. And the example we used was, I need a new hinge for my door. So many years ago, I would just go down to the hardware store on Main Street and I'd say, hey, I need a hinge. And they'd say, where do you live? Or I know where you live. I know who you are. Here's the hinge you need. And you'd go, how do you know that? And they'd come back and they say, well, I know where you live. I know who built your house. I know that builder always used these hinges. So this is the one you need. And you're like, of course. And if you had that experience like with Home Depot or something else, you'd be in the aisle of hinges for a while, holding the hinge you need, trying to find what you want. And the experience is terrible. So what we're looking for is we're looking for some level of frictionless experience. And I'll say frictionless probably 1,000 times during this conversation. But what we're really looking for is to create that kind of relationship between people and the outcomes they're trying to achieve so that they're guaranteed they're going to be able to achieve it. They feel safe getting there. They feel comfortable getting there. They know that how they're dealing with the agentic interface that's been presented is going to be successful. And the problem we had when we were trying to do this is we could connect all the systems and we could get to the data and we can do other things, but trying to understand what the user was trying to accomplish kind of made us go back on our heels, where we built a lot of predefined interaction patterns. And then if you enter that interaction pattern, like, I need a new tire for my bike, it would know how to direct you through the new tire experience. And we would do things like ask about what's going on. Is this the bike you're looking for? And try and get them to the point where we could get the tire ordered or get to a resolution that made them happy without having to involve a person. The challenge was we'd be inside of the, getting the tire set up and they'd say, oh yeah, I need a chain. And you'd be like, I don't know what to do. So what we're looking for as we begin to get into AI and ML and the LLMs is we're able to really understand if we're on the path to an outcome, if we're deviating from that outcome, and we need to take a step sideways into a new outcome. But from the user experience, it's all very seamless, even though behind the scenes we're doing a number of things we're going to kind of talk about here. So I think that's pretty straightforward. But what we're really looking for is that we really think that true agentic design is possible. The challenge, and there'll be some challenges we'll talk about as we kind of go through this and some ways to think about it. And what we're really looking for is, how do we think about this? How do we communicate it? How do we not try to do everything at once? And how do we make progress that's demonstrable and valuable, and we can show the organization that what we're doing is leading to a better product experience, therefore a better product. So we look at software products we use today. We're presented with screens. The screens have buttons. The buttons let us do things. And it's all very static and it's driven. And we're really spending more time trying to figure out how to provide the data versus how do we get what we want. And what we want to do is we want to create that confidence and that ability to say, hey, I need a new bike tire for my bike. And it knows how to get us to that new bike tire and who it needs to talk to and what the discovery process is. And we're reducing friction. And what we're looking at is it kind of comes into, we talk about all this stuff. We have these great ideas. You know what happens when engineers kind of get kind of on their own path. It usually deviates from the product path, can deviate from the vision. And we're finding that engineering teams are building a lot of this stuff and they're really excited about it. But when we go to apply it to the product, there's really no value. And we're finding that that value doesn't exist because the product team can't describe to the engineering team what they're trying to accomplish and what the value is. And even worse, the product team can't talk to the executive team about why they're doing this and why we should invest and what we're expecting to get out of it and how we're going to measure that it has value. So all the standard things we do around products and trying to understand or trying to rationalize kind of where we're going. So, agentic interfaces, if you remember anything at all, they're outcome first and they're context aware. Because without those two things, the agentic interface is just going to spin and it's going to frustrate the user. So we're still talking about orchestrating flows. We're still talking about going through gates. We're still talking about specific processes we have to do to reach that outcome. But we're doing it in a way that the user's like, I'm just going to succeed. We also need to use the new technology that we have to figure out, are they on that glide path, that outcome, or is something else happening and we need to put that outcome away, we need to go to a different outcome, or we need to pull the user back onto track to that outcome and do it in a way that, again, they're going to be successful. A huge part of this is, if we need to do a new features or a new way of using the product or something else in our current interface designs and we release it and the users are hit with behavior changes, they're hit with pattern changes, they're hit with extra work cycles or misunderstandings, and new features are just really hard. And a lot of times you'll deliver new features that are very valuable. People don't want to use them because they're set in their patterns. We can produce new capabilities, we can deliver new capabilities, and we can do it in a way where it's really hidden from the user and they just hit the new capability and they're like, well, of course it does that. And then of course the integrations are kind of at the edges for the outcomes, but we're going to need integrations inside in order to establish the context and the information needed to guide them along that path to the outcome they want. And I think if you had like the game up where you said, you track how many times I say outcome, it's going to be a lot. Agentic patterns are modular interaction strategies that help products feel more intelligent, helpful, and intuitive. You don't need to have a full AI transformation to accomplish this. And it's not about replacing UX. They're about unlocking the momentum of being able to get users to be successful in the products. So we've come up with 6 patterns that we're working on right now to try and define how to talk about how to map the user journeys and achieving the outcomes that users want to do, primarily because we don't know how to talk about this. And it's very difficult to draw on whiteboards, agentic interfaces. It's very difficult to explain them. It's very difficult to iterate on them because it all feels very kind of amorphous and blob-like. And we tend to use language around it that's very imprecise. And everybody begins having different mental models. And you know what happens when product and engineering all have different mental models? You don't get what you want out the pipe when you go to deliver it. And we end up learning a lot, but we end up spending a lot of money that doesn't lead to any demonstrable value in the market. So what we're looking at is, how do you do this, right? Where's friction? Where's confusion? Where are users stuck? Where do users spend time? We have a ton of tools in the current interfaces that allow us to track that. Let's find one. We need to find a pattern or a set of patterns to apply to this to guide them toward the outcome. We like the patterns because we kind of understand what they do. We understand where to use them. We understand the value they have, and we know how to hook them together. So we get a playbook, right? We're all talking about, playbooks like Jupyter Notebooks, and we're talking about other things or workflow steps. We're really kind of talking about kind of similar things, except these patterns themselves have intent and capability as an atomic operation within an agentic interface. And we're also looking at how do we create adaptive ways to help users succeed at those outcomes that are within the swim lane or the boundaries of what we're trying to achieve. We don't have to lock people into A to B to C. We can kind of go A derivation 1, B, and then C derivation 2. And it becomes more of a mesh or an area space versus a hard line to get to that outcome. And that's what makes this so great is the interface can kind of can begin to tune itself, given the context of the user and the understanding of the user using it, how they want to achieve things. And it can guide them that way using the same patterns, but in kind of a different voice or a different tone. And then within within the AI, the last statement's really appropriate. We need to build with AI, not be bound by it. So don't get stuck into, I have to do this the way AI is saying I have to do it. No, this is the way it should be done. How do I use AI to enable that? All right, here's the 6 patterns, right? We have watch and wait, and we'll talk about this a little more as we go through. We ask and confirm, multi-intent fork, handoff and resume, collect and summarize, recommend and explain. And by the way, there's a set of blog posts going onto our website over the next probably week that has each of these patterns much more completely, distinctly defined with more understanding about when and where you use these. So look for those coming. I think that, I think we can make through these and we might need to cut short given where we are in time. And so let's talk about watch and wait, right? It keeps an eye out for when you want to do something to trigger entering back into some outcome-based set of tasks, right? You're waiting on something to change. You're waiting on something like, hey, I know you want to fill out this form for a new hire, and you say that you're busy. Would you like me to remind you later to complete this activity, right? It's a watch and wait. We're moving away from just-in-time interactions with the interface to, hey, I need to get back to this, please remind me. So again, we begin getting somebody kind of sitting next to us that are helping us achieve the outcomes, but it's also able to adapt to our work style and how we're doing things in order to achieve that outcome. Listening, deferring, and resuming. And the system needs to be able to monitor state and determine when it needs to become active and begin, coming back into you. And that needs to be designed by intent based upon the agentic flow. And when that event happens, and it could be a timer going off, it could be some other thing you're waiting on. When that happens, the system needs to be sufficiently aware to rehydrate that interaction, bring back the context, understand where you were, and begin guiding you back through once it asks if you want to do that again. Ask and confirm. You're asking the user for something. There's certain times when you need to confirm that. There's other times that you don't. You can ask for a confirmation later. But we need to make sure that the user trusts us. If you say delete a file and it just deletes it, sometimes the user's like, well, why didn't you ask me if I sure I wanted to delete it? So you need to keep iterating on those things with ask and confirm based upon user behavior patterns. And you can notice those as they go through the interfaces to determine when do I need to confirm? Am I over confirming? Am I under confirming? Do I need clarification in order to really understand what's going on? And those are all part of the agentic interface, and that builds trust and it builds relatedness between the user and the interfaces. And if we kind of look at what's going on in the market space, people are beginning to form real relationships with these chatbots like ChatGPT and Claude and other ones, where it's looking at ways for you to be part of it, to entice you. I work with ChatGPT, kind of off and on, and I always appreciate when it tells me that I'm smart. It feels really good. It doesn't really know, but it tells me that. Hey, Philip, can people ask questions? I don't.
Yeah, they're in the chat. I don't know if you can pull up the chat. It's not a question, but Ty had a suggestion. If you can pull up the chat.
Yep, we find it.
And anyone can take themselves off mute. They can also raise their hand for questions too.
Ty's question, it would be really cool to have templated evaluation suites and scorers
Yeah.
for each of these patterns.
Gosh, it would, Ty. You're absolutely right.
Hey guys, sorry, it's kind of loud in the background, so I threw it in chat. But yeah, like just looking at these patterns, I think it'd be really awesome to have like templated eval suites where people could just kind of take the pattern, tune the eval to their own use case, and then just have the agent up and running in no time.
Yeah, you can go to the store and buy your Lego kit.
Yeah, that's right.
Handoff and resume. It allows things to be handed off. Like if we're going to interact with another system, we need to be able to hand off some activity and be able to resume back. We need to persist the context, right? And the challenge here is that usually when you do something like a handoff, you'll hand something off and you'll go blank, or you'll go offline, whatever's working with you. And it's really important that when handoffs happen within agentic interfaces, that you come back and you go, hey, I did this. This is what you can do next. This is what's possible inside of the next pattern sequence. Do you want me to follow up? It's that trust thing, right? I did this. Do you need to follow up? I did this. Should I put something in your calendar? I did this. What do you want to do next? Versus I did this. We need to keep leading the person who's using the interface into the next activity, into the next thing, even if they say to us, hey, I'm going to go to lunch, I'll be back later, right? Collecting and summarizing, again, it's how do we place things in front of a user that are valuable based upon what's important to them. And a lot of times people will go, hey, I really need to understand the cost projections for the next 2 quarters. And they would go look at a bunch of spreadsheets and they would go grab things. And we're looking at the ability for the agentic interfaces to understand the intent, understand the domain of data or the domain of knowledge it has access to, being able to look into that domain and pull back and be able to summarize or collect or deliver things to the user in a way that is most comfortable and most understandable to the user without being spooky, right? We need to make sure whatever we're doing here doesn't get spooky, like the user is experiencing the interface of knowing too much about them or knowing too much where it begins like it's crossing a boundary. It needs to stay on this side of the boundary so that people feel confident and comfortable and safe using it. Recommending explaining. We all know that this happens within agentic interfaces. It'll say something like that you don't understand, and you'll ask it to explain it more deeply. It comes into a little bit of I need to do a task. So I've been given a task by my supervisor to accomplish. I'm not really sure how to do that. I need to provide the quarterly reports for the board deck. And I've never done that before. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go to my agentic interface and I'm going to say something like, hey, I need to create these projections for the board report. I'm not sure how to do it. Can you explain to me how it's been done before? Can you explain to me how other people do this? What's my strategy? And again, you're bringing somebody into an outcome of, I need that on the board deck. And the system understands the starting point. It understands how other people have done this. It understands who you are and the information you have access to and begins guiding you down that path to a successful outcome. It's not to say that it's going to go along and it's going to hit a bump, but it's got you on that path and the user feels confident they're going to be able to achieve the outcome they want. So let's put it into an example, right? So everybody here on the call has probably applied for a loan, and you go to apply for a loan and you fill out a bunch of information, and then you create a bunch of documents and you upload the documents and you check the status and you look for messages coming back from the loan officer or the bank, and you fill those out and you kind of go back and forth and you kind of have your fingers crossed that the underwriter is going to approve it and the loan's going to come through. Well, there's a ton of friction inside of there because you are responsible for figuring out everything you need to have. You're responsible for getting it uploaded. You have to validate and check things. And you end up interacting with an interface you're not used to. You're not sure if the document's uploaded. You're not sure if they were reviewed. You have really no insight into this in a way that a normal person, or not normal, an average person would expect to work on this. So what we're looking for is we're looking for the ability to have more of an agentic fit. So I want to apply for a loan. It's going to ask you for information and it'll confirm that you have it. It's gathering your initial eligibility data. It's looking at it for completeness. If it's incomplete, it's asking you questions. It's attempting to reach the outcome of having complete information. And we know that during that point, we're going to be confirming that the information is correct. And what that's done, we're going to be able to determine whether or not they have the initial eligibility data complete. And then we're going to start gathering documentation and credit reports and other things to begin going along that outcome path of being able to approve or deny the loan. The agentic flow has to go into things like watch and wait. It's going to be sending out requests to get credit reports, to gather other information. It's doing it kind of on its own. It's waiting for that information to come back, and it will determine when it can continue or if it needs to branch off into another flow in order to ensure that we're collecting the right information. And then once we have everything, we're going to hand it off to a human. The human will go through the information and make a determination through an agentic interface of whether or not to fund or not fund the loan. And then once they've determined that, we're going to resume and then begin the flow of funding the loan and distributing the loan. And if you think about it, right, if you were applying for a loan and this was the type of interface that you were presented with where you don't really know anything, you just know you need a loan. And you would begin the conversation with, hey, I want to buy a house and I need a loan. That's the prompt. And then it's going to put you into this agentic flow and it's going to drive you to completion. It's going to enable you to do things like to get out of that flow and maybe go into another flow within the thing. Like, I really want to learn about mortgage loans. I really want to learn about what's an ARM, or How do I figure out what my rate is if it says prime plus 2? Like these are all things that it's going to want to know that we can work on inside of the interface, but it's a deviation from the outcome, but it doesn't distract from the goal state that we're trying to achieve because we're maintaining the context. And I think we've all worked with agentic or like interfaces with some of the like ChatGPT. And before they added the concept of the canvas, it didn't really remember what you did before. And it would try to recreate things from nothing. And if we try to recreate things from nothing inside of agentic interfaces, it's just awful because we keep telling the system the same things over and over again. And we end up getting skew, and we end up getting deviation. And we're finding that if we can maintain that context of what the outcome they're trying to achieve, and a user may have multiple outcomes going on at the same time, they may have multiple contexts, but as long as we can bind into that context, we can understand where they are, we can understand what they've done, and we understand where they need to go. It's like, again, we have somebody next to us who's helping us achieve that, and they understand what we're trying to do, and they understand what we've done. Where do you start? A lot of people will attempt to look at this as a very large space to solve inside of, and they'll look at, I can solve this not generically, but I can solve this kind of in a large, wide pattern, and my understanding of how this works, I can get to outcomes without really having to put anything inside of this. It's just going to be able to achieve it. And that's not going to happen. You need to think about creating agentic workflows to start with because people are not thinking in this way. We're still thinking about, is this form complete? Are all the fields filled in? Does it pass validation? Does it hit save? Does it go into the database through some CRUD operation? Is it there? What do we do next? We write a bunch of code to go, oh, when this ages for 2 weeks, we're going to do something. We still think in that way versus, hey, when all this information is complete, they're going to have a loan. We overthink it based upon our previous understanding of how we get people through providing data, providing state, or responding to questions in order to get that. We need to think in the concept of an outcome. We need to think about what are the things along that journey to the outcome, and we need to implement those in a way that they're not fixed and static. It allows us to use the AI and allows us to use some of the other capabilities in order to help them along to that outcome because that's why we built it. And if we go back to our earlier conversation, one of the things that we found out when we were trying to create this dialer is that they would start down a path and then they'd want to go down a different path or something else would come out of the conversation and it would confuse the heck out of our product and our code and we would jettison them over to a person. And now we have the ability to deal with that variability inside of here and be able to get them there even though they may have gone off on some wild goose chase. Focus is reduce the friction. How do we reduce the friction in achieving the outcome? Pro tip, this isn't all about AI, right? It's just about AI where it makes sense. Some of the pitfalls here are over automation. You've tried to do too much. And this is where engineering really gets involved because they want to create something that just is amazing, but they're not really bound to the product value piece. They're not bound to how product is envisioning this working. They're not bound to how we're going to measure for value, how we're going to differentiate the product in the market space, how we're going to create, compelling reasons to use this product and for ultimately for customers to buy our product so that we can onboard cash and we can be better off. We also know that if we're inside of this and we're beginning to create really complex ways to reach outcomes or creating single entry points where we'll figure out what they want to do as we go down the path. We end up creating highly coupled systems. We've gotten away from the decoupling. We've moved away from specific kind of declarative ways to reach outcomes. And we do that if we kind of try and collapse it all together, we have all sorts of forks inside of there, and we end up getting spaghetti agentic interfaces. Confirmation spam. Users don't always want to say, I agree, or continue, or yes. They want the system to have an understanding. If I'm entering a phone number or I'm providing some demographic information, it can validate it behind the scenes and go, yeah, that makes sense, or that's reasonable, or yes, I validated that address. And a level of reasonableness or accuracy is sufficient. If the accuracy isn't there and it raises a flag based upon the historical way of managing that data, they can come back and say, hey, we were asking for a phone number and it looks like you entered a phone number that's in the UK given the pattern. Is this a UK phone number? We need to start it with the country code prefix of 44. where they didn't know that. They just entered a number, not understanding you need a country code. Memory gaps. We know that if we're maintaining the context and we're understanding what they're trying to do, and they begin to go down they begin to move forward in that, and we're not keeping track of what they've done, even if it's outside of the pattern that we're following or the path we're following. If we don't remember what they've been doing, they're going to come back and ask a question, or they're going to want to do something, and we don't remember, and they'll be frustrated because they go, hey, I already did that. Why do I have to do it again? Because a lot of the things that are going on in the agentic interface collection or absorbing data from our users is that data is only persistent and resident inside of our agentic interface model. We haven't pushed it to an additional system, or we haven't generated a completion outcome, or even an intermediate outcome where we can drop that context or drop that memory. We have to remember it all. We also have to understand what is the duration of that memory, because there's times, pardon me, when we're doing something and the context based upon the age of that memory doesn't make sense anymore. And we need to call that out. Yeah, you were working on applying for this loan 2 weeks ago. A lot of stuff has changed. We need to kind of fill in some different gaps. We need to start again, or we need to validate these things are still in place because we know that these are temporal based values. And then annoying. We can't be annoying. And we find that we get to be annoying and unnecessary when we try to create a breadth of the solution that's too wide, because we keep asking questions that try to figure out where we're going to fork, or it's asking questions about, do we need to resume? Do we need to wait? Do we need to hand off? And the ability to test that and understand that becomes too wide. And we end up putting in stopgaps, or we end up putting in gates, doing these things to try and make sure we're on the right path. And it's annoying. I see some questions. How many are doing agentic UX today? I don't know. I know a lot of people are throwing chatbots and agents into their systems, trying to help people do things. I ran into a simple one the other day. I'm remodeling my bathroom. Yeah, I'm remodeling my bathroom. And I needed another trash can. And I went to, we have a private trash provider in my neighborhood, and I went to their website, and they had an agentic interface. And it said, how can I help you? And I said, I need another trash can. And it led me through ordering another trash can, having it delivered, and telling me about how much it's going to cost. I didn't talk to a person. It took all of about a minute. It was amazing. It was a very simple outcome. I need another trash can. But it led me through it in a way that was very comfortable, and it made sense. And I think that a lot of companies that are dealing with things like variable product delivery to people, like how many trash cans do you have, is something that is a really good idea to reduce the friction, remove the person in the loop, and be able to achieve an outcome that's relatively simple, but it's very powerful.
So I have a question for the audience. By show of hands, how many of you are doing agentic UX today inside your company? Steven, can you share what you guys are doing and how far along you are, if you're following any of these patterns?
I think at the beginning of the agentic. So I think I'd say we're combining some workflows, the ask and explain to get started, not as far as monitoring. I think that the ask and explain and, collect and summarize, state, starting to tie things together to what they've already done, having the context of, for example, a filing that someone has already done, or you did a filing last quarter. So you have the context of what the type of filing they might do this quarter. So I'd say it's early, but it's starting to tie together a couple patterns.
Awesome.
Did you introduce these? Did your product team or UX team have these kind of patterns in mind when they did that?
I'm not sure. I'm not as close to that group, or I'm watching from the outside. So it's a great question. I'm not sure.
When you started down this path, Stephen, did the product team come and talk to you about what they're trying to create and how they're going to measure whether or not it's successful and the impact on the product in the market?
I because I wasn't close to it, I'm not sure what level. I'm pretty sure they did, though, talk about what they were trying to accomplish. How they were going to measure that, I don't know, but it did have to do with, that did resonate with me, the reducing friction. And as I think about it, that came up, right? Like, how do we friction with a case where somebody just did this 3 months ago. Now they come in your system to do it again. It's like, why are you making me tell you the same things I already told you? So I think that's part of the friction that I know I heard expressed as something they wanted to solve, that was communicated to the combined product and engineering team. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's about as close as I was to it.
It did, but I don't know if I want to do some homework, but it'd be interesting to go and talk to the engineers who worked on that and ask them, how hard was it for product to explain what they wanted you to build? Or how hard was it for product to explain to you how you're successful?
I think in our case, it actually wasn't hard because we have a portion of the organization that is directly servicing customers, and they know quarter over quarter there are routine processes that take a certain number of person hours to achieve, and initial AI and agentic patterns were really around like eliminating some very known processes, and now we're even extending into, moving beyond just making existing processes efficient and finding new opportunities.
I was going to say that goes back to one of our previous webinars where we talked about self-service, level 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And so focus on what's that first line of defense. We've been doing things like this early on, but it's just been menu driven, right? And so it's looking at all those, but also looking at how many flows go to level 1 and get passed off to level 2. That's where all the value is all of those flows that go between those different tiers, the pass offs. Yeah.
Yep, precisely. A question from Kurt to David. How about the opportunities for non-UX agentic agents? Something that doesn't have the user interface necessarily built into it.
I'm trying to picture that.
Yeah, Kurt,
when
can
you say
come off
interface,
mute
what do you mean by interface built into it?
Okay, the corner or my interest is when things break. And it goes back to some of the architecture and monitoring that Doug and Philip have done. Where I imagine an agent is desperately needed and could really demonstrate value to the business is in the case of something breaking. We have resilient systems that can take multiple paths, can take multiple data sources, but when things break, how do you find out where and get them fixed? And so I go back to some of the network monitoring. And my imagination is to be able to use an agent that's triggered by something happening in event logs, an error message, anything that happens. You have a starting point to be able to capture additional data. If I can go into a server and say, okay, something happened, give me every network packet that went in and out of this server or container or what have you for the last second, 5 seconds, whatever it takes, and collect all that data to be able to put it with the incident and wrap it as it turns into a problem.
Yeah, I think that's a very doable thing. Pingmean, you said that Trent and Javier may want to join in and kind of share what they're thinking.
Yep.
I just want to share that autocorrect changed my words, but in my company we have embraced a tool called Replete AI. That's agentic AI. At the beginning, I was not fond of, but we have noticed that data analysts love it and have created amazing pieces. I am really surprised. But clearly, the agent creates well structured data manipulation software. But you need to be an artist in prompt engineering, which is not my case. But I am surprised about the potential.
Awesome.
And then Trent, can you describe your use cases? Just provide a little more context.
Again, I guess similar to Steven, I'm more of a front end sort of person, so I don't have super details, but I know we do have, quite extensive public APIs as well. So there are more data driven tasks that get incorporated into the AI patterns and agentic patterns as well. So they're not all UI driven, but the initial user interaction may prompt, but then there are, connections under the hood based on just API usages.
Do you think that somebody calling an API is an intent?
Definitely.
Yeah, and so that intent wants to achieve an outcome, and we always go in and we we kind of hardwire things together, and then if the intent or the intent's kind of the same, but the outcome's a little different based upon some variance, we wire things together in a different way, or we go into the code and we create a different case or some other way of managing that differentiation. But ultimately, it ends up kind of at the same outcome, which is I need to interact with something in order to complete this intent. And we spend a lot of time in UX trying to get the data staged in such a way, or even in APIs to get the data staged in such a way that the outcome can be achieved. And we have to manage all of that logic versus if I'm adding a new capability and I can instruct the agentic interface to say, oh, this is a new capability. They may want to do it. It's in this case, this type of intent's going to bring that in. And this is how you need to model it going into the target outcome. And it'll just do it. And our requirement to keep all of the API logic bound to the outcome logic or the UI logic bound to the outcome logic, because I consider APIs and UIs kind of the same thing. We write a lot of code. And what we're really trying to do now is we're trying to go, this is some variability on the intent. And based upon the learning that's going on, this is how you take that variability to achieve, a common outcome. Yeah, keeping front ends and back ends wired together and nothing against the people that do that. It's just hard. It's just really hard. And it'd be really nice if we had an interface that was incredibly malleable and incredibly adaptive and interacted with users in a way that it didn't create any level of, discomfort or disruption to be able to get their work done. And that's kind of what I'm seeing is really the value here is business happens in a way that people may not even know really how to accomplish that task in the business, but now they can and they can do it with confidence.
Javier, you've given us some information about what you've done with your company. Would you be willing to share that?
You mean screenshot?
Well, you stated in my case, we've used replete agents with AI. It's
Yeah.
empowered data analysts. What have you found that was successful? How can we
Yeah, it's like we have a weekly show off. The data analysts showed what they have accomplished, but in our case, I use another tool which is Devin, which is amazing, but I don't use Replete because it's like it doesn't fit my responsibilities. And at the beginning, I didn't took it seriously, but now I realize with the things I've seen that really makes things great, but the core is not only the agentic UI experience, is your ability to specify the context and the right prompt to make the model go through the right neurological path and renders the new UX. So that's what I discovered, but I haven't used the tool. But speaking with data analysts, I realized that they have developed that skill. It's like they have prompt engineering skills more than anything else.
David, back to you.
Awesome. Hey, Ty, do you want to weigh in anywhere here?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Is anybody currently using like large eval suites or golden sets for agent training?
Let's take a look in the chat if anybody's raised their hands on that yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, to the prompt engineering, so I just got into this world into the wild world of evals like 2 weeks ago, and I discovered very, very quickly that this is likely, my guess is that Cursor was just valued at $900 million as an ID, and it occurred to me as let's try to give you my story on evals. So is everybody familiar with what an eval is?
Explain it,
The
please.
audience
I think
may not be.
it's
Go ahead and explain it. Yeah.
It's, if you're familiar with test-driven development of any kind, it's basically TDD for LLMs. And what you do is you build up a bunch of test cases, which are basically just like snippets of conversations. And then you hand that conversation to your OpenAI API or Anthropic API or whatever. You run it through whatever your prompt is, and then you can score it in any way you want. You could have manual code that you wrote, did the agent add 2 + 2 correctly? Is 4 in the response, etc. But what I found is most common is creating a scorer that is also an LLM. So imagine you have this test suite, and what's deciding whether or not the test case passes or fails is another LLM. So I'll have a scorer, like I have one called like an actionability scorer for some of our things, where I basically test, did the agent in the context of this conversation, in this mocked context, in this mocked conversation, did the agent respond with an actionable question? Like, would you like me to take the next logical step? And then basically what you do is you run these eval suites, and obviously you cache them because this could get very expensive at scale, though the models are getting really cheap. You run these evals, and then you just keep tuning your prompt. So like, it takes prompt engineering and turns it, instead of like vibe, I've been using the term vibe prompting, but instead of just like prompting, you're actually running like a reasonable set of expectations against your prompt, your system prompt and context in the context of a wider conversation. And I found like very, very quickly that the quality of my agent, how it thought, how it reasoned, how it did the stuff that I wanted it to do, and we're building a very generalized agent that can do a bunch of stuff, it just got massively better so quickly. And what I could even do is I could teach my IDE to run my eval suite, and then I could loop Claude 4, which is Sonnet, which is the one that I typically use in Cursor. I could loop it back in, and it could do my prompt engineering for me. And it would basically, like, just in a loop, it'd run the eval suite. Did it pass? No. I'm going to go update the prompt. Did run the eval suite? Did it pass? No. It's a really quite satisfying, but also like big moment for me. It's like, oh, this is how these guys are getting these crazy agents, like the one in Cursor, or like in ChatGPT's Codex, or if you use like O3 with Deep Research or Claude Deep Research. It's how they're doing it with these like really kind of minuscule prompts that are not particularly, you wouldn't look at them and be like, oh man, this is like the craziest good engineered prompt I've ever seen. What they're doing is they're running it, they're looping it through these large eval suites, and they're also looping user feedback in as evals for the models to test new versions of them. So I thought that was really interesting learnings that I'm happy to go deep and share with anybody if it's valuable to them.
Yeah, we can make that available if you see, for those of you, just write his name down, and Ty, we could put your contact info in the chat if you want. We won't
Yeah,
publish it widely. Yeah.
no, that's great. And I'm an open book, so publish it however you want. I'm happy to help whoever I can.
Thanks, Ty.
Ty, are you looking at user feedback? That's the primary element that you're pulling apart?
Sorry, I was muted there while I was typing. So that's the stage that we're getting to. So yes, we are set up. We're supposed to get to production Monday. You know,
Okay.
the first pass of it, we just kind of had to guess, right? Like you kind of throw some stuff at it. You know, some of the stuff that I is like you don't know until you know is, as I was researching, I started researching a lot on prompt injection. And so I just tried a couple of prompt injection attempts on our base agent, and it fell apart. It's like, yeah, you could tell this thing to be a banana if you wanted to.
So it's primarily audio input?
No. It's all text. We're building, it's essentially a chat GPT clone that's verticalized for artists.
Okay.
So you interact with it just basically exactly like ChatGPT. It just has a wider array of tools, and it's trained on things like our art marketing knowledge base. So it rags all that in. It
So
can
you've got
actually
textual input at a very large volume.
right, and with very very large context turns, right? Because it's totally
Yeah.
open, like ChatGPT, right?
Okay.
And so the goal is to get to production, next week, and then yeah, we have like a very significant like user input ingestion system that like we don't know what our customers are going to want yet, because they've never had anything like this verticalized for them. So yeah, then the next stage is you basically create a loop with those evals. So you ingest all of that, what our customers are asking this thing, and then you continue to tune your evals and continue to tune your prompt to, like, to David's point, to better follow these agentic patterns and directed toward the outcome that you can infer from the user request.
What's your output expectation?
Unpack that for me.
What do you think you're going to get? You've got a tremendous volume of input. What's your expectation of an output?
Yeah, I don't even know that we know yet.
The volume is so large. I'm right there with you. That's remarkable.
Yeah, like it feels very Wild West right now at this point. That's for sure.
It could be unbounded.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I chat with Ty sometimes, and I'm like, I want to be able to enter in, hey, ASF, I want you to make me $1 million in 12 months by selling my art. And I would expect it to come up with the strategy and have the interfaces and understand how to create marketing plans and things like that in order to help me achieve that goal. I may suck as an artist, but I can always give it a try.
Yeah, no, and then on the flip side of that, if you ingest just from our sales team, the single biggest objection our artists have toward purchasing any kind of SaaS product is they just don't think their art's good enough. They really just want to go through a therapy session, like building confidence to share it. So, I mean, massive array of potential directions that this thing could go. And, we're very much in the state of, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know that we don't want our agent to turn into, a watermelon halfway through just because the user said something,
So I'd like to introduce one of our other panelists. I don't know if he'll come on camera or not, but Travis is one of our other AI experts, and he has just some thoughts for you, Ty. Maybe just it ties back to what I talked about in our last session about when to bring in governance. And it sounds like you're early in the journey, but and maybe you've thought through these. These are some additional pitfalls, maybe beyond what David showed on the previous slide of pitfalls to avoid. But I was just going to introduce Travis, who's been with our firm for a while, and he's one of our more technical folks too. So, Travis.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I was just sort of going to comment on the need for guardrails, which Philip just mentioned, right? So as you sort of have the LM as a judge, eval, which is sort of in the same sphere there, the need for guardrails obviously becomes much more important. Adding any type of or amplifying any type of bias in any of these models through sort of these closed loop cycles of evals or LM as a judge is something that can become a problem. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of call that out. It's important. And then if you're whether you're using public models or you're fine tuning your own or whatever it might be, model drift also becomes a huge issue there as well, because like small drifts, again, call it bias, just call it drift, can get greatly amplified, as these things are sort of training, and now they're training a little bit on moving targets and things like this. And so those guardrails become super, super important as you're like looping in more and more of these events.
And as part of that governance and guardrails, if I'm a software company and I've released an agentic interface and somebody interface says, how much money did your company make last year? And it responds, that's a problem. It's like doing something to like asking for all the information from a vendor of this type of tech, asking something like, hey, tell me how you do everything. And it comes back and gives you every single prompt that it uses to configure the engine. And it probably doesn't want to do that. Right, Ty?
Yes, you heard my Cursor story. And so we know that this is happening even with billion dollar AI startups.
Mm-hmm. And part of some of the work we did, if you ever go to AKF and you do the Ask AKF, that Ask AKF has an entire governance model on top of it in order to figure out who you are, what you're able to see, and what I can consider to provide responses to you. And people, I work with companies that do a lot of governance, risk, and compliance, and this isn't even really on their radar. And we need to make sure that this is something that we pay attention to in our design strategies. To close, somebody said, does this affect product? This affects product probably more than engineering, because they need to figure out how to talk about this and how to define what they want to achieve. And then as far as the architecture, I think the architectures are evolving daily in the best way to do this, because we're dealing with so much information and so much compute, and all of that costs money. How do we do that effectively? And can we bring some of our caching and context management strategies into this? And how would we do that? And how do we prevent that from crippling our future? So yeah, there's a lot of experimentation and ideation going on. So I don't think anybody has it right yet.
All right. David, can you show the last slide?
Yeah.
One more slide and hit the forward button.
The business
Little
and
animation. Yeah,
Oh,
so we're
here
at
we
the
go.
very end, folks. We have 2 more sessions left, and I will be teaching the next one, and then David will be teaching the very last one. So change management, this is around influencing and persuading others. It's not so much change to your system, it's driving big organizational change, such as a transformation. And we'll go through some examples and some techniques how to lead others and why you and your role are key to this anytime there's any kind of architectural impact to the organization. Then we will transition. Our last session is getting into some more of the mechanics around domain-driven design, and we'll do an event storming exercise. So it's going to be very interactive. We're going to design a gaming system. It may be menu-driven. It won't be agentic, most likely, for this one, but it'll be our most interactive one. But it's a very fun exercise that David will be leading on August 8th. So please subscribe to these on YouTube and pull in your friends for the last 2, and then we'll take a pause for a while before we start up a new series again. So thank you all, and you guys have a good weekend.